provide legal advice to the best that I can. If any individuals are having issues, sometimes it's criminals, sometimes it's housing and other areas like that. Um, Legal Aid Society is a vast organization, and so we have many different areas and many different specialties that attorneys do. And so, a lot of the times when people come to me asking for assistance in a certain area, I can refer them to a unit in the Legal Aid Society. And if there isn't a unit in the Legal Aid Society that does it, then I can try and find an attorney that does. If a person gets arrested, we can invoke their rights in their behalf too, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. So I thought of maybe just talking to you all about what to do in police interactions. Generally speaking, when I give these types of what they call know your rights trainings, talks, what have you, I try to strike the appropriate balance between protecting yourself legally and protecting yourself physically. Um, Physically, because it's no secret that police officers are abusive when it comes to people of color, particularly Black people. And then legally, obviously, because if you wind up getting arrested or something like that, we don't want you putting your foot in your mouth potentially and hurting your own criminal case. And so I talk a little bit about that. The one thing that I would recommend, regardless of any situation, if you are having an interaction with the police, if you can record the interaction, record the interaction. Video, if possible, audio, if video isn't really possible. If you're audio recording and not video recording, like you have the phone in your pocket, to the extent that you can state the date, the time, the location, things like that, details so that a person hearing the recording can get a sense of where you are. But if you can record the encounter because
Wait,
uh,
Samir, I just want to interrupt because I think the students have a question about whether or not that is legal in New York State.
okay, so good question. So number one, video recording is legal in New York State. You are allowed to record the police. That's number one. Number two, New York is a one-party consent state, meaning that if you consent to the recording, you can legally record even if the other person doesn't consent, even if the other person doesn't know. So again, I would recommend that if you have an interaction with the police and you are able to record, because you might not necessarily be able to, but if you are able to record, then you should record, so that it's not just the word of the cop versus your word. Because if it's the word of a cop versus your word, the judge more likely than not is going to believe the cop, even though there's so much evidence of cops lying. So if you can record an interaction, then record the interaction.
Also,
Uh,
I just want to jump in on one because
mhm.
I did have a case recently. My client was not able to do a video recording, but he held his recording in his hand, and I got to hear the tone of the officer talk to my client. And guess what? It was exactly the opposite of what of the officer told the DA, he said. So even a audio recording is helpful.
Okay, so generally when I talk about know your rights, I split it up to like four areas, if you will. So there's street stops, there's car stops, there's home stops, and then there's arrest, what to do if you get arrested. So I'm going to talk about each of those things in turn. When it comes to being stopped on the street, so let's say you're walking down the street in a particular neighborhood and the police stop you, right? Are you required to have ID? Is it a law that you must have ID? No, it's not. It's recommended. You should carry ID, but it's not uh, illegal if you don't have ID. If you get stopped by the police might ask you questions like, where are you going from? Where are you going? Where are you coming from? A lot of times in these situations, people will just answer and say what they're doing. Although my advice would be wherever you're going, you're always going home. Where are you coming from, school or work or what have you? But more importantly, if the police ask you, do you have anything on you? The answer is no. If you honestly do have something on you and the police ask you, do you have anything on you? The answer is no. You do not fess up to having something if in fact you have something. Okay. because you're not helping yourself. A lot of people think that if you're honest with the cops, that things will be a lot better. Dishonesty generally is the worst policy. Honesty when it comes to the police is probably the second worst policy. If you have something on you, you don't fess up to it. You just don't. Now, some people say, well, if you lie about that, could you get charged with lying to the police? Answer to that is you can only get charged with lying if you lie about your name, if you lie about your address, and you lie about your date of birth. You're not allowed to lie about those three things to the police. Anything else, either you don't say anything, or if you're putting your foot in your mouth by telling the truth, then you don't tell the truth. If the police ask you to search you, what's the answer? Okay, I'm seeing people shaking their head no. Good. The answer is no. Now, certainly it happens in New York City. I wouldn't be surprised if it happened here or anywhere else. If you deal with an officer who searches you anyway, then it kind of is what it is. There's really not much to do. But at that point, you say, number one, I don't consent to the search. And then short of that, you're not going to say anything else. Okay? But you do not consent. If you have to give permission in order for a search to happen, or for them to, do whatever it is that they're looking to do, you don't give permission. You never, ever, ever give permission. You don't give permission for them to search you, to search your bag, to search your clothing, nothing. All right. Any questions about that? All right, great. So, and you can ask questions at the end, but we're going to go section by section. Car stops, right? If you're driving and you get pulled over, you should have a driver's license. You can get a ticket at the very least if you don't have a driver's license. And depending on the circumstances, like if your license is suspended, you could wind up getting arrested. So you're supposed to have a driver's license. You're supposed to have identification if you are the driver. Okay. Can the police order everybody out of the car after they pull over a car? The answer is yes. But can the police search you or the car? They can only do that if they have either reasonable suspicion or probable cause, which means more often than not, when they're stopping you, no, they're not legally allowed to search you or to frisk you or the car. Real quick, does anybody know the difference between a frisk and a search? Okay, so a frisk is a pat down of the outer garment. So patting down your pants, patting down your shirt, patting down your back. Once you start going into things, like into the pocket, into the jacket, into the bag, that's not a frisk anymore. That's a search. Okay. But in the circumstance where a police officer orders you out of the car, unless they have reasonable suspicion, they are not allowed to frisk you. And unless they have probable cause, they're not allowed to search you. Can police officer get in trouble for conducting a non-consensual search? Very good question. Theoretically, yes. Um, in actuality, it just about never happens. Um, Unfortunately, a lot of the times cops do whatever they want, which is part of the reason why in talking to you all, like I want to find the balance between protecting yourself legally, but also protecting yourself physically.
I just want to add something on that, Zamir.
Mhm.
Who asked the question, can police get in trouble for a non-consensual search?
Michaela.
Michaela. So that's a really good question because it feeds into a different issue, which is if you are the person who was searched without probable cause, what can you do? Can you sue the police? I don't know if we're going to be able to get into this area, but the police then can be sued. Unfortunately, they won't be personally sued, but they'll be brought in and they'll have to answer to the search, and your civil lawyer will try to get you money for the injury that you had or suffered. Sean just walked into the room. Sean, let's do a quick introduction of Sean.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. I don't know if we went through the bios prior to, but my name is Sean Sykes. I currently work with Legal Aid. I'm in the Bronx with Robin. Zamir left us. That's about it. I'm here to be answer some questions and be a mentor.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Amir, you were going on to the next issue, I think.
Yeah. So with car searches, right? Again, the driver has to have identification. You should not be driving a car if you don't have a license on you, and you definitely should not be driving a car if your license is suspended. Aside from that, the rules with regards to street stops still applies, right? So if the cop asks to search your car, let me back up. If the cop asks, do you have anything in the car, right? The answer is no. If you honestly do have something in the car and the cop asks you, do you have something in the car? The answer is no. You don't fess up, you don't tell on yourself because it's not really going to help you. Now, could there be a story? I've heard stories where, oh, cops gave people a break. It happens occasionally, I suppose. But other than that, you should not be fessing up to things. Now, well, we're not going to get there. If the cop asks to search your car, the answer is no. You cannot search the car, period, under any circumstances. If they proceed to do it anyway, because cops very often do whatever they want to do, you make it clear that you don't consent to the search. But if you have a choice in the matter, you do not allow the police to search your car. Nor you allow police to search your person. So if they order everybody out the car, you don't consent to a search of your person either. Okay? Any questions on that? And like I said, we'll come back to the end. So if you don't have questions now, that's fine.
Is there, when you decline to have them search your car or your person, is there language you should use? Because I feel like they'll take it as you're resisting arrest.
So, okay, that's a good question. So to be clear, if the cops are physically searching you, so they're not asking you to search you, then that's beyond the realm of consent or giving permission, right? They're just doing what they want to do. And so at that point, you can say, I don't consent to the search. And then after that, just stop talking. Because that only, if you're dealing with an officer who's acting that way, which chances are you might, then that's only going to make things worse. Isabel, I thought you had a question.
I had essentially the same question. I just wanted to know like how we communicate to officers that we don't consent, but you pretty much just covered that.
Yeah, so if it's a matter, if they are asking the question, like, can I search you, your bag, your car, what have you? No. I mean, it's literally that simple, just no. Or I don't consent to the search.
If an officer claims that they have like reasonable suspicion or probable cause, do they have to disclose like what they are suspicious of?
They're supposed to. So like, one of the biggest cases that I've seen in New York City, or types of cases I've seen in New York City when they claim that they have reasonable suspicion or probable cause is when we're talking about marijuana. They'll say that, oh, I smell marijuana in the car. Now, if the person just smoked and you can clearly smell it, then that's one thing. But a lot of times they're saying that when it's not actually true. So cops will say it, and they're supposed to say it, but sometimes they'll say it when it's not actually true. Like they'll say it so that they're kind of justifying whatever they're about to do later. Anybody else? Okay, so that's car searches. Now we're going to talk about home searches, okay, or homes. If the police come to your home, assuming you did not call them and that nobody in your household called them, legally speaking, the only way that police officers are allowed to enter the home without a warrant is if, number one, consent, or number two, what they call exigent circumstances, which means kind of like an emergency. So like if you had a situation where somebody ran into the house and where they're running from the police and they run into their house because they're trying to get rid of drugs or something, that could be an emergency or exigent circumstances. That doesn't happen often. It's emergencies. So if the police do not have a warrant, the only way that they can enter your house is if you let them in. if you give them permission. Now, if you give them permission because you want the police in your house, so be it. But if you do not want the police in your house, my advice is don't open the door. If you have to talk to the police, you talk to them through the door. If the police claim to have a warrant, tell them to slide the warrant under the door so that you can see it. Okay? Do not open the door, because if you open the door, you run the risk of the police coming in and then claiming later on that they had your permission to enter your home. So if you don't want the police entering your home, do not open the door. You keep the door closed, you deal with them that way. Now, the reality is, I'm not sure how things are done in New York here, although I wouldn't be surprised if it was done similarly to New York City. When the cops have a warrant, they don't ask for permission. Like, they just burst through the door. And so likely they do the same thing, because cops, I think, generally act universally kind of everywhere in the country. So if they claim to have a warrant, then chances are they're just going to come right in. But if they have a warrant and they're trying to be polite and respectful about it, ask to see it. And make sure that if you are able to see it, that the warrant is correct, meaning that it has your address and that it has the date and the time for the search or for the entry. Any questions about the home?
I just, oh, go ahead. Who's talking? Michaela?
Yeah. Like, I know this is like kind of like, I think that, like, I was just thinking about, like, in terms of like your digital devices, does that have the same application as to your actual house? Like, if they ask to see, like, I don't know, like they think that you have something incriminating on one of your devices, are they allowed to like force you to open up your devices? Or
So can they force you?
like, can
Legally speaking,
yeah.
no, they cannot.
Okay.
Legally speaking, they have to get a warrant in order to get into your phone. If you give them permission, then obviously they don't. But if you do not give them permission to go into your phone, then they have to get a warrant in order to go into your phone.
But that's only a law that just became effective a few years ago because of a lot of good lawyering and challenging the law. So that was a great question, Michaela.
Okay, last part. Okay. If you get arrested for whatever reason, do not speak to the police. I'm going to say that again. If you get arrested for whatever reason, do not speak to the police. I'm going to say that a third time for good measure. If you get arrested, do not speak to the police. You'd be surprised how many people will talk to the police after they've been arrested. It makes your life difficult. If you have a case, it makes our life difficult as the attorneys representing you. So please do not speak to the police. Think about it this way. If the police have arrested you, especially if you did not do anything, if the police have arrested you, then at that point, they're not interested in hearing logic. They're not interested in hearing your side of the story. They're just interested in getting the arrest and calling it a day. So, how many people have heard of Miranda warnings? Okay. Who can tell us what the Miranda warnings are, if you know? Like, what do you think about when you hear Miranda warnings?
Everything you say can and will be used against you. You have the right to an attorney. And I think there's one more.
You have the right to remain silent.
Right. Okay. So you have the right to remain silent, right? And you have the right to an attorney. If you get arrested for whatever reason, you exercise your right to remain silent and you exercise your right to an attorney. I'm going to talk about each of these to be clear. When it comes to exercising your right to remain silent, you have to literally say, I exercise my right to remain silent. Simply staying quiet is not enough. There was a case that happened about a decade ago where a man was quiet for 2 hours and 45 minutes. And then after being quiet for 2 hours and 45 minutes, he said something that the prosecution later used against him. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States, which is the highest court in the entire country. And that court said he did not exercise his right to remain silent, even though he stayed quiet for 2 hours and 45 minutes. You have to say, I exercise my right to remain silent. If you don't say it, it is not invoked. Okay? Right to an attorney, same thing. You have to say, I exercise my right to an attorney. And it has to be clear. It cannot be questionable. So if you say something like, I think I should get an attorney, not good enough. If you ask the cop, you think maybe I should get an attorney, not good enough. You have to say, I exercise my right to an attorney, because judges will try and screw you over if you say anything different. To give an extreme example, there was a case that happened in Louisiana where a man was being questioned by the police, and he was using the term dog the way some of us use the term dog, like you're talking like, yo, dog, what are you doing? Right? So he said to the police, I'm not going to say what you want me to say, so you might as well just get me a lawyer, dog. And then after that, he said something that the prosecution used against him at trial. The court said he did not exercise his right to an attorney because he asked for a lawyer dog. And we don't know what a lawyer dog is. It would be funny if it weren't so terrible. But the man went to prison and is in prison now for a statement that was used against him when, in all seriousness, he did exercise his right to an attorney, or try to exercise his right to an attorney. So I'm saying that to say, you want to be crystal clear, okay? I exercise my right to an attorney. You can say, I want a lawyer, whatever the case is. And I'm not talking to you. I'm invoking my right to remain silent. I want a lawyer. And then from that point, don't say anything else, okay? Now, also to be clear about things, sometimes when people hear Miranda warnings, they're thinking about speech, about the things you say. You should not say anything. You should not write anything either. Don't write anything if you're arrested. Don't sign anything either, okay? If you have to sign something, you could sign it with a lawyer present, but otherwise, don't sign anything. Don't say anything. Don't write anything. Don't sign anything. If you're arrested and you're offered food in the precinct, do not eat or drink the food. Anybody know why?
The DNA can be used against you.
Yes. Okay. Cops do things like that where you think, oh, they're just trying to be nice. I mean, they gave me a bottle of water, or they gave me, a slice of pizza or what have you. They get cigarettes too. Like if you smoke, which hopefully you don't, but if you do, they do that as well. They're not giving you the water because they like you. They're not giving you the water because they care about you. They're giving it to you because when you take it and throw it in the garbage, they're going into the garbage to take your DNA sample so that they have it. So you don't want to give them any DNA if you can help it. Okay. So I believe that's everything. Sean, Robin, do you want to add anything?
Sean, do you want to add anything about car stops?
We can circle back at the end. I'll throw
Okay.
a question out though, to Zamir or you, Robin. What about if it's a DWI stop and they ask you to blow into their breathalyzer machine?
All right, so good question, right? So number one, please don't drive drunk. Please, because number one, it's just a bad thing to do. Number two, you get screwed over royally as a person facing a drunk driving case, because you're talking about heavy fines plus a lot of programs that you have to do in order to get your license back. So it's just terrible.
The most important thing for them, Zamir, they're under 21.
Yeah, so then
zero tolerance.
Yes, and then you lose your license for a year, I believe, if you catch a drunk driving charge under 21
And that's
years old.
only if you have any alcohol in you.
Right.
You're under a special restriction, under 21 drivers. Does anyone have a driver's license? Where it's stamped? Is it stamped, Nathaniel? Is it stamped under 21?
Yeah.
That's to give the cop a heads up when they stop you.
Yeah, so please don't drive drunk. Please, please, please don't drive drunk. But if you somehow manage to drive drunk anyway, and you get pulled over by the police, you do not consent to the breathalyzer. You don't consent to the breathalyzer in the street, and you don't consent to the breathalyzer at the precinct. Okay? The reason why you should not consent to the breathalyzer test is because in New York, there are two misdemeanor laws that deal with drunk driving. One law deals with just regular drunk driving, like if you're driving drunk. The other law deals with driving when you have a blood alcohol content of 0.08 or more. Okay? When you get arrested for drunk driving, you're going to get charged with the regular drunk driving. If you blow into the machine when in fact you have been drunk and you have been driving, then you're creating evidence against yourself. And so they're going to charge you with both laws instead of just one. Okay? Whenever cops drive drunk, and they do it often, whenever cops drive drunk, they never, ever take the breathalyzer test because they know that they create evidence against themselves if they did it. Okay? So if you're driving drunk, don't take the breathalyzer test. Now, if you refuse to take the test, they'll tell you that your license will be suspended. But if you take the test and you blow above a 0.08, your license is going to get suspended anyway. So don't take the test if you were drinking before getting behind the wheel. Now, if you were not drinking, you did not take any medication, because sometimes you can have medication that leads to your blood alcohol content going up. So if you didn't take any medication and you're honestly not intoxicated, nothing like that, then maybe you could think about taking it if you truly need your license. But if you were drinking before getting behind the wheel, you do not take the breathalyzer test under any circumstances.
You also have a very limited right to counsel. So you could actually, or if you have a grown-up, you can tell the grown-up who's driving, you could also tell that grown-up that they have a limited right to a lawyer at that moment to make that decision. As long as you have a lawyer's name and number, you wouldn't be able to say, hey, can you just get me a legal aid lawyer so I could ask the question whether I should blow into the breathalyzer? That's not going to work. But if you have a specific name, you'd be able to use that. Any questions?
I had a question about the home search. What came to mind was Breonna Taylor, and I was thinking about the whole like don't open the door. Can you kind of explain what a no knock warrant is, and is that something that affects us in New York?
So second question is yes. So a no knock warrant is, well, let's talk about knock warrants. So when a police officer gets a warrant, they're supposed to knock on the door and announce themselves. So like police open the door and like. But no knock warrants were created, the justification for it was that if you have people who might get rid of evidence when they hear the police at the door. So they get no knock warrants. This is what they say. They get no knock warrants so that they can get inside without having to identify themselves and stop people from potentially destroying evidence. So if there's a risk of evidence being destroyed, particularly in like drug cases where you could flush stuff down the toilet, if there's a risk of evidence being destroyed, then those would be the types of cases where police officers would get no knock warrants. I mean, the thing about Breonna Taylor's case is just like there's so much wrong with it. I mean, with, they got no knock warrants, but then claimed that they knocked anyway. So yeah, that's all I'll say there.
I have a question. So, like, from hearing you speak, like, how can we hold like these police officers accountable when they ignore procedures or policies? Like, what can we do as citizens?
That is an excellent question, and it's one that I struggle with now. I mean, I think one of the things that you can always do is when you see something recorded, um, and of course, be careful with how you record it, how close you are, and things like that, because that could always make things worse. But if you see things happening, record it, um, because in the few instances where there has been any police accountability, that's how it's come about. Um, so if people are more aware of it, that helps. Um, one of the things that we've been seeing over this past year is more awareness of police officers engaging in misconduct. And there have been laws that have been passed over the last year to deal with police misconduct. I don't think it's anywhere near as enough, but it's a start, I suppose. Um, but that's, I think, the one thing that can happen. Just continue bringing awareness to it, because people need to be saturated with it. People over the last few decades have been saturated with Black people being the face of crime and police officers being the face of law and order. And one of the things that I think these constant records can do is start to show people that the police are not as venerable as they've been made out to be. Um, and once we start, chipping away at that image, then we can start talking about how we're going to rein in on police misconduct.
I also wanted to say that the regular people filing complaints does help. The police reforms that have come about this year based on the governor, Governor Cuomo's executive orders, have been the result of so much of this abuse coming to light and for people to record. And they have changed some of the laws. It is getting a little better. It was very difficult for us as attorneys when we represent somebody who says this cop stops everybody on the street for no reason at all. And we had to fight to get the internal records of that police officer. It took years sometimes. You had people in jail waiting for, and hoping and praying that something would come to light. And finally, in New York State, the law was just changed so that we are supposed to get those records. Defense attorneys are supposed to get those records a little easier.
I remember being told once that like if you're getting pulled over, you don't have to pull over as soon as you see like the flashing lights. Like if you can get to a more public area, that would be the better thing to do. But I don't know how accurate that is.
I mean, I think if you can, right? I mean, it's a little difficult to do, like if you're like on a highway or something. But if you can, I would definitely recommend that you do that.
But you won't get penalized for not like pulling over as soon as you see like the lights or sirens or anything.
When you say penalized, do you mean like charged with a crime or penalized in terms of what?
Yeah, like charged with a crime.
Okay, so I don't think that you can really get charged with a crime if you wait until you get to a certain spot to pull over, as long as it's not taking like a long time, right? I mean, if the lights go on and you're stopping it like 10 minutes later, that could be an issue. But if you're talking about, a few blocks here, you know, that's less of an issue. And I don't really see you getting charged with a crime.
I will say if there's a police officer behind you, they put their lights on, stop. There's really no reason to wait to get to some other place. It most likely would just cause more issue, if anything. And the police officer they're the ones that put the siren on, and they have an obligation as well to pull you over in what they determine is a safe location. So in order to avoid, I know we're speaking theoretically here, but as a real life practice point, if you get stopped, if there's lights behind you, pull over as far off to the side as you can and just wait in your car for the police to come. That's my practice tip. May differ from Robin and Zamir, but
Let me say this too. Let me say this though. Regardless of where you decide to pull over, record it.
I did have one case in New York City. I don't remember which one it was, but my client, first of all, in New York City, they have body cams now. So the officer activates the body cam, they're supposed to, that's protocol, when they're about to make a traffic stop or a car stop or an arrest. They have different issues that activate and so on the body cam, the first thing that was discussed was, why didn't you pull over? You saw my lights and sirens, right? Why didn't you pull over? And the first words out of my client's mouth, it wasn't safe. I pulled over as soon as I could. And to answer your question, Annalyn, is that going to penalize him? The client is going to be judged by a jury of his peers. And they're going to decide whether that was reasonable based on the evidence. So everything is very fact sensitive in the law. So if the client abused that and really went like 4 miles down the road and drove 120 miles an hour really to get away, probably the client would be penalized with a jury instruction to the jury by the judge saying, I'm charging you that the client was fleeing. And there would be like this bad feeling of the client was fleeing. So that would be take a negative inference into the case. So that's another way to answer the question. I'm sure everyone has so many questions. What, you guys, about everything? I'm going to start cold calling.
I did have a question based on the article that was sent out.
Yes.
So how are we able to, because most of it was about like the police like lying about evidence to like incriminate suspects further. Are there ways that we ourselves can, like, say we get arrested for some reason, are able to like protect ourselves against the police lying directly to us? Like, what steps should we take to avoid like confessing to crimes we didn't commit?
Be on a jury and understand when confessions come in, sometimes they're forced. People, you could ask 10 people and 9 of them will say, well, why would he confess if he didn't do it? And then you look at the number of exonerations that have occurred in this country, and you see how many people are innocently in jail. And part of the reason why they're in jail is because they have this false confession. And you really don't know how it affects you to be in custody. You know, obviously, I've interviewed thousands of people, but one person who made it clear to me that they would say anything while they're in custody was another lawyer who happened to be arrested in court. And she had this little words with a court officer. One thing led to another, and the court officer actually cuffed her in court, put her in a cell, and no one was allowed to visit her, you know, for whatever. It was probably only an hour. When she was released, she said to us, she said, I would have said anything, I would have signed anything to get myself out. And yeah, so what can you do, Isabel? You can read more on confessions, on forced confessions. You can go to the list of exonerated people and their cases, and you could read up on that. Kayla, that's what she wants to do as a grown-up, right, Kayla? Kayla wants to do wrongful conviction law. And a lot of it has to do with police. But one of the things you could do is you could protect your rights, just what Zamir was saying. Don't make any statements. Don't think that the police are there to help you. They are not there to help anyone who was arrested. They're just not. We've seen too many cases.
Yeah,
Is that
bring
it?
it back to that. Just, don't say anything. Um, yeah, just don't say anything. To best that you can hold out, don't say anything. Because, police officers have their ways of trying to get people to talk. So it will take, being strong if you find yourself in that situation, but don't say anything.
I'd also
Oh.
add very quickly, it doesn't need to be that you're under arrest either. I just had a case where a client was called to come to the precinct and he thought he was just going to speak to the cops and he was then arrested. And whatever he's now saying was used against him. So, you may not think that they're investigating you or you're going to be arrested, but I wouldn't say anything at all.
I was just going to say that the client who is informed by, let's say, a member of the family, hey, the cops were looking for you. They left this card. What do you think that person should do after hearing what Zamir was talking about? What's the best thing for that client to do? That person to do? What do you think, Michaela?
To contact an attorney or something?
Yes, yes. How do I, as a regular person the cops just say they want to ask me a couple of questions, how do I make sure I'm protected? I get a lawyer. I invoke one of the most important constitutional rights I have. I can do that myself by asking for a lawyer. So at Legal Aid, and they have this at Westchester Legal Aid as well, they have an intake, some attorney and a paralegal who are kind of on standby for anybody who needs a lawyer at that moment. You can always get help.
If you exercise your right to an attorney, how long can, and I'm just going off of like too many episodes of Law and Order, but how long can they like withhold the attorney? Like sometimes I see it seems like they're stalling. How long can they legally kind of hold up that process of you speaking to a lawyer?
So that's a great question. Whenever I call the precinct to speak to that cop who's on the card that my client just showed me, I will try to get the time down that I'm invoking. And invoking is a term of art that lawyers use and cops understand. Hey, Mr. Cop, I'm invoking all of my client's rights. And that means you cannot speak to him without me present. That's right to counsel. And I'll say, I'm letting you know, it's 1 o'clock, it's 4 o'clock now, and I'm indicating that on my note, and I'm going to follow up with an email or I just put it in my file. So Monique, when you talk about how long can they delay, it's not a question of time, it's a question of what happens if they violated right to counsel. So if I've spoken to that cop or at the station house and something doesn't get to the person, let's say my client is actually in the room, in the interrogation room, and I've had this happen, and the mama calls me. My son just went to the precinct. He was supposed to just talk to them for a minute. It's been 4 hours. Can you help me? Yes, mama. I call the police. I say what I just said and I write down. And then later on, there's a full confession which the client said, but it's in the officer's words, and my client signs the piece of paper. And the date and the time is 2 hours later after I already called. So then I become a witness in front of the judge, and my testimony basically will say that that officer violated my client's rights. I'm now a witness, and judge, that statement that my client allegedly made and signed should be thrown out. And there's a word we call in the law, it's called suppression. Should be suppressed. That's a legal term of art. So that's how it plays out in the real world.
Generally speaking, also, people are supposed to be brought before the judge within 24 hours of their arrest. So if you are being arrested for something and you're making it clear that you're not going to talk to the police, you're supposed to be seeing a lawyer at some point, before you see the judge, which again is within the next 24 hours. One more thing that I actually forgot to say that I wanted to say to you all. If you are brought to the precinct and you're brought in one of those rooms where they question people, don't say anything in the room. So with police there, without police there, because they're recording what happens in that room. And a lot of people make the mistake of thinking, oh, I'm not going to talk to the police. I invoke my right to silence. And the police are like, okay. And then they walk out and leave you there. And then people talk thinking because nobody's there, that what they're saying isn't being captured. And, that's wound up hurting people when they go to trial later on. So if you are brought into one of those rooms, don't say anything, period, except for I exercise my right to remain silent and I exercise my right to an attorney. And if you're by yourself, always assume that you're being recorded, put your head down, don't say anything, or just stare at the wall.
I had a case where my client is banging his hand and saying, damn it, I'm so stupid. Like he's showing that he got caught and he's doing this. And then the jury sees that. And what do you think they think? Evidence of guilt.
I can just make a few points before I know we're about to wrap it up soon as well. So, but I'm assuming that I'm hoping that we're speaking theoretically here, and none of you guys will be questioned in the back of a pen or something like that. So this is all just knowledge for you all. But I really wanted to touch upon some real life practice points that you guys might actually face. Robin enjoys this story. I was actually one of her students some time ago. And, when I was your guys' age, I get stopped by cops all the time. And it caused me to actually drive scared. Every time I'd see a police officer, I would try to go the other way, or I would, try to avoid them. If you're driving at a certain time where I live, in White Plains as well, a certain type of car, you're a target automatically. There's certain things that we can do to try to be less of a target. Maybe don't put those tints on your car because they're illegal, or don't drive erratically, blasting music. But sometimes you can't avoid that, and it's possible that you might be stopped. You just want to be respectful. Be respectful to the police officer. Record, like Zamir said. And the other thing is, marijuana is something that is it's common, and it seems to be what your generation is into. I have younger siblings that put me into the wave and the vibes that you guys are in. If you're gonna smoke, don't smoke in the car, because Amir just stated that police officers use that as a prefix to then go and start searching and having you get out the vehicle. Robin actually mentioned this way back when, but if you're gonna smoke, do it in your house. There's more intricacies to that. I don't know if we have the time to go in depth on it, but don't smoke out in public. Don't smoke out on the street. Don't smoke in your car. If you're going to do it inside the privacy of your home. Like Zamir said, they can't come in without a warrant. The fact that you all are here is an inspiration. And I know that years from now, you all will be lawyers, doctors, politicians, business people, just good, productive members of society. And I'm inspired to be here with you all. And I can't wait to see what you all become. And I hope that we do keep in touch. One thing that I do in my life is I think of three, you may not know what you want to be right now, but think of three things that you might want to be when you grow up. Three goals, an A plan, a B plan, a C plan. And every day of your life, you work towards that goal. Some days you're going to be tired. Some days you won't really want to do much, but be productive. Try to work towards that goal. And you'll achieve it. Thank you. That's all I have to say, guys.
Sean and Zamir, can you put your email address in the chat? I told the students that if they have questions from family members or they discuss anything we've discussed and they want to follow up, that they could email us.
I know we're closing. I do just have one question because I feel like it's so relevant, especially for young people. There's a lot of protesting going on, and I know that you know, a lot of the students who are on now, they're seniors. They're going to be moving into young adulthood. They're going to be going away to college. If they're going to go out and protest, is there anything that they should know before doing so, or if they are arrested? Does anything change, or pretty much the tips you've given us are pretty much the same?
For arrest, it's pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Don't talk to the police, none of that stuff.
But-
For the oh, go ahead.
Well, I just want to say, if anybody's going protesting with a large group, before they go, they should download the New York Civil Liberty Unions. They have a quick, like 10, 20 points on what to do if, specifically for protesting. You should know your rights.
That's good.
Also, I mean, just, understand that when you go out and you protest, particularly if you're protesting police brutality, that, there is a risk of you possibly getting hurt. And that's a risk that exists regardless of whether you protest violently or non-violently, because police officers are extra out of control when it comes to protesters. So that's definitely something to think about. And then, just be mindful of what it is. If you're protesting with a group and it looks like the group is getting rowdy, maybe perhaps, stepping back from that. Paying attention to where exactly the police are, and to also what the police are doing. I don't know if you guys are aware of what happened last June in the Bronx, in Mott Haven, where people came out to non-violently protest. And this was around the time when Bill de Blasio had his curfew in place. And the police purposely planned an attack where they trapped everybody in so that nobody could get out before the curfew, and then proceeded to beat people down and arrested everybody. So, no one on this Zoom call thinks that, but there are some people who think that protesting is just something fun, a nice social thing where you could go out and we do it, and it's not. So just be careful if you're going to go protest. Be mindful of where the police are. Be mindful of what people are doing. Just be aware of your surroundings. And, if you wind up getting arrested, then the same thing applies. Don't talk to police, period. Except to say that you exercise your right to an attorney and that you exercise your right to remain silent.
I don't think we discussed backpacks, Samir. Do you want to just quickly review rights on the backpacks? Because
I think the same thing, where when it comes to containers, right? Police officers are not supposed to search containers unless they have a warrant or unless they have your permission. So the same rules apply. No, you cannot search my bag. No, you cannot search me. No, you cannot search my car. No, no, and no again. If they proceed to search it anyway, as cops will do, then it is what it is, but you just make it clear that you do not consent to the search.
Yeah, when I do these Know Your Rights in the Bronx before COVID, when I went to the schools, you know, I would always ask the students about searches coming in, and literally half the class would raise their hand how many times they've been searched and their backpacks, specifically their backpacks were searched, and they thought it was okay. They didn't know they had the right to say no. So just because you're a student, you still have rights, the same rights. No, no, no.
Okay, so does anyone else have any other questions they would like to ask our guest speakers? No, you guys are good?
Speak now or forever hold your peace. Now you have our email, so you can reach out if you have a question afterwards.
Okay, well, thank you, Robin, Zamir, and Sean for coming to speak to us. I personally learned a lot, and I'm pretty sure my the other people in the group has also learned a lot. And yeah, thank you very much, Black Awareness. Thank you for coming out again, and those who are not in Black Awareness, thank you for coming too. And everyone have a great day.